Thank you. Yeah, so we've introduced ourselves, and this is the Anti-Ageism Activism for Everyone workshop that is connected to Age Proud Leeds, which is our campaign at Time to Shine. You want to go to the next slide for me, please, Sarah? So just a bit of background about who we are. So Time to Shine is actually one of 14 Ageing Better programmes that runs across England and is part of Leeds Older People's Forum. We've been running since 2015, and our main aim is to reduce loneliness and social isolation. And the Friendly Communities project that Sarah is one of the project workers of is a project that brings together age-friendly Leeds and dementia-friendly Leeds. And age-friendly, of course, is part of the World Health Organization, so it's a global initiative, and dementia-friendly is part of the Alzheimer's Society. And so the Friendly Communities kind of aligns the two and brings the two initiatives together. Next slide, please, Sarah. So as part of the work that Friendly Communities are doing, we launched the Age Proud Leeds campaign, which is actually a part of a partnership with Leeds City Council and the NHS and some of our third sector partners. And it's really been created as a real co-production aspect of bringing together the feelings and thoughts of older people. And some of the people that you can see in the slide here are part of our age-friendly steering group. And the steering group have very much shaped the campaign and helped us to devise the 5 key messages that you see in this slide here. And those 5 key messages have run throughout the campaign, but have allowed us to kind of look at the very complex issues that surround ageism, and look at that in a sort of focused way so that we can focus on the different aspects of it and how those different aspects affect people. Okay, next slide. Thank you, Sarah. So we've actually got a quiz that we'd like to share with you. And so we've got a poll. So I'm hoping that my technical abilities that are depleted today, I have to say. And I'm going to launch the poll. So there are 3 questions. And when I launch that, you have the opportunity to answer all 3, which are multiple choice questions. And when you've answered all 3, if you just click submit, and we should be able to see the collective responses. So here we go. Can everybody see that? So first question is, what percentage of British adults report experiencing prejudice based on their age? Is that 11%, 26% or 52%? The second question is, what is the annual net contribution that older people are making to the UK economy? Is it 27 million, 40 billion, sorry, or is it that they're not contributing at all? And the final question is, in Hollywood films, what percentage of dialogue is spoken by people over 65? Is it less than 5%, less than 10%, or less than 20%? Okay. Right, I'm going to end the polling and I'll share the results. Can you see the results there? So Sarah's going to talk us through some of the answers to these questions now.
Okay, thanks, Linda. So yeah, the first question, what percentage of British adults report experiencing prejudice based on their age? The answer was actually 26%. So 5 people got that one right. So yeah, ageism can be experienced by people at any age. In line with previous research, a higher proportion of British adults report experiencing prejudice based on their age than on any other characteristic. And that was found in a report by the Equality and Human Rights Commission in 2018, just to show how widespread discrimination based on age is. So question 2, what is the annual net contribution that older people are making to the UK economy? The correct answer is actually £40 billion. So 7 out of the 14 got that one correct. So yeah, far from being a financial pressure on society, older people are making an annual net contribution of £40 billion to the UK economy. So that's net of the costs of pension, welfare, health support, for example. And by 2030, this is forecast to rise to an estimated £77 billion. And the final question, in Hollywood films, what percentage of dialogue is spoken by people over 65? The answer is less than 5%. So this was a study carried out by Polygraph. At age 65, which is around the age which we know from research that the public identifies as old, men get just 5% of the lines and women just 3%. And this shows how, how underrepresented older people are, whether that be in a positive, a neutral or a negative light. The fact that they're not represented in those films is quite significant, really. People need to be represented and to be seen. Okay. Thanks, Linda.
Do you want to reshare the slides then, Sarah?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think this is my section, isn't it, Linda?
It is.
Okay, so we're now going to talk a little bit about birthdays and do a little activity in groups. So just to set some context firstly, when we're children, birthdays are something which we usually look forward to. Parties are planned, there might be jelly and ice cream, there might be presents. We count down to the big day, and children are usually very happy to have a birthday, or to put it another way, to get a year older. Birthday cards for children are upbeat, and the same goes for young people as well, with messages full of positivity and celebration that a new stage in life has been reached. And this continues for a while as we move into adolescence. People get old enough to drive, old enough to drink, old enough to vote. All these milestones continue to be celebrated. And there is a sense that as we become older, we gain things, we gain our freedom and other things as well. So at what point do we suddenly change the tone of these messages? When do we stop with the jelly and ice cream and feeling excited about birthdays? Well, from looking at birthday cards, the tone starts to change around the age of 30. And it's interesting, birthday cards really are a really good example of culturally accepted ageism, where negativity is attributed to getting older. I mean, it's usually done in a jokey way, but the underlying message is clear: younger is better in many of these cards. So we wanted to do an exercise around birthday cards to get us thinking about these jokes and these underlying messages and what impact they might be having, and think about what we can do about it as well. So I think we're going to go into 3 breakout rooms, and each room will have a facilitator. There'll be myself in one room, Vicky in another, and Dave in another room. And we're going to ask some questions and look at some examples of birthday cards. So when we get in our room, we'll each have 3 cards, and we're going to be asking, are these birthday cards ageist? If so, why? What messages do these birthday cards convey? And what stereotypes do they feed into? And if you could, how would you change one of these cards so it is anti-ageist? So not just neutral, but anti-ageist, celebrating getting older. Okay, so I think Linda's going to pop us into our rooms now.
Thank you everybody for coming back. Hope that all went well. The automatic allocation didn't quite work in terms of facilitation, but it went okay in the end. So I hope you've enjoyed that conversation. What I'm going to do now is ask everybody to ask the facilitators, just give us a bit of feedback on the conversation that you've just had. So let's start, I'll go in numerical order. I think Sarah, you were in room 1. So Sarah, would you like to just feedback on the conversation that's happened in your room?
Yeah, I can do. Would you like me to share the slides, the cards that we were looking at? Would that be helpful?
Yes, that probably would. Thank you.
So I had slide 8, which is this one.
Thank you.
And in brief, we thought that, yeah, they were all very negative. The first one had sort of connotations around regret. The second one around associating memory loss with age, and it was a very sort of sad looking mouse wearing glasses. And the third one, people just thought it was just ridiculous, but also that it linked getting older with being sort of more unlovable or less attractive or less valued, and that we also talked a little bit about how older people sometimes aren't seen as being in relationships. So older people in care homes and things like that are seen as being beyond that stage in their life. Overall, we felt that there was no element of celebration in the cards, all very negative. And why would you give something like that to somebody that you love, and are wanting to give something, you know, positive to? And in order to make them better and anti-ageist, we thought, for example, the mouse, it should be a bright, colourful mouse. And rather than talking about senior moments, it should be about happy birthday, have lots of cheese and have some wine as well, would make it better. And maybe for the my gorgeous boyfriend, I still love you even though you're 30, you know, just take out the I still and even though, and just be you're 30 and I love you, that type of thing. I think was generally what we said.
Thank you. That's really helpful. They are really negative messages, those, aren't they? Okay. Can you share the slide that Dave was using in his room? And Dave, would you like to feed back to the main room for us on what happened in your meeting?
Hi, yeah. Well, actually, we didn't do such a sort of detailed critique of each card here, but it was more about a feeling of being aware of these cards exist, and the kind of, you know, the phrases like "sick to death" of seeing them. I think yeah, I'm sure people might chip in with this if I'm not actually picking this up correctly. There was a sort of feeling of trying to avoid knowing that this kind of ageist attitude is available, pervasive, I think was the word used in card shops, etc. But it's really, and it's negative, but what can you do about it? Obviously, we had a bit of discussion about some people do kind of laugh along with this, and there is a certain amount of complicity with some of the people who do actually receive and indeed send these cards. I must admit, Linda, you know, as usual, I sort of referred a little bit to my own personal experience of folks in my age group, as it were, often kind of laugh along with this kind of sort of negative ageist kind of attitude. It's like, well, what do you expect at our age kind of stuff. There was something about truth, which was the focus upon age. And so, you know, you are old, which equates as bad, and therefore there's a kind of truth about that. You know, age is bad, but that's irrefutable. It's truth. Like, no one unpicks that at all. It's like, well, and I must admit, I was referring to a card a friend of mine actually sent another friend of mine, which was, fuck, you're old. And they all laughed about it, you know. And actually, I saw a very similar card on the TV in a TV series earlier this week. There was references to equating this in terms of challenging racism and sexism. Like, you know, would you send similar cards anymore if they were racist or sexist? It just wouldn't be acceptable. But ageism, we kind of just play along with it. I don't think we really got into yet. One, how do we deal with that, as you know, these cards exist, and two, what would be the kind of images or words about appreciating age. But I'm not sure if I'm necessarily. Are there comments from folks from breakout room that might want to add to that I may have missed or overlooked?
I think you've covered it really well Dave, if that helps.
Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dave. That was a really good conversation by the sound of it. Okay, so I'm going to pass to Vicky now. If you'd like to feedback on breakout room 3 for us, Vicky, that would be great.
I will indeed. Thank you, Linda. So we had a really interesting conversation, and there was some different reactions as well in the room, which you would expect, of course. But the first initial reaction was that they're absolutely dreadful and so negative. And, you know, it really reinforces the message and suggests that as you get older, life is less fun and you are of less value. So there's those really sort of key messages running through them. And then someone else said that, well, they could understand why that might be offensive, but will probably send it depending upon the personality of who they were sending it to. So there's you know, other sort of factors that come into play in terms of choosing, is this card suitable for somebody or not? And as you were saying, you know, the other person is obviously complicit in that because they would quite enjoy receiving that card and would find it quite humorous. But I think we all agree that it did make you sit back and think about it, and it really kind of raises awareness where maybe you just accept it before and it's just part of you know, just how we are in this society. And there's a lot of difference in terms of how we culturally accept these sort of remarks, where in other cultures age is really sort of, you know, respected and revered and seen as something much more positive. Actually, sadness around the fact that this all starts, you know, around 30 years old. So you're starting to feel like you know, well, I use the word over the hill again, my language, you know, I just kind of threw that term out because it's kind of just programmed within me. And we also did say that if this was around race or gender, then the heckles will probably go up straight away, where it's more acceptable because it's a more humorous thing around age. So again, it says a lot, doesn't it, about what we accept within our society. But there's this message that we are less of everything, less active, less of value, as I said before. And it's playing into that cultural acceptance. And then one of the members in our group also said that the third one kind of push buttons straight away, because there's that thing that, you know, you're a little bit daft and stupid when you get to that age group, and you can't do things like technology, you know, you just, so yeah, so it's that sort of pushes buttons as well, but might be seen as others as just a little bit of a joke, where it's not really taken that way. It's actually quite offensive. We didn't really get round to changing it though, because we did have quite a full discussion. So yeah, so I don't know if anyone in our group has got anything to add in terms of how they might actually change that around a little bit, or just rip them up and start again, maybe.
Yes, I would say from that, I would say to put cards with ages on them, you know, because the chronological age is not helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, in terms of changing the message, I think I'm going to pass to Dave now, who might be able to help us to think about how we can switch these messages around and be a bit more positive. But I was actually reflecting then as you were talking, I spent some time with a good friend of mine this week who is 60 this year and is the most upbeat, positive person, and yet described herself as feeling depressed about being 60. And I found the conversation that I had with her very different to the conversation that I might have had a couple of years ago before we started this campaign. Sort of, you know, start to be quite an activist myself, which is a good thing. Okay, I'm going to pass to Dave now. Have you got some positive images to share with us, I think, Dave?
Okay, shall I share them, or will you put up slide 11, I think it is? Yeah, okay, great. Thanks very much. Okay, so what would an anti-ageist birthday card look like? some people in Colorado set up a competition for designers to come up with designs that are generally very nice cards and very much about, dare I say it, simply celebrating the day. So the You Are Mighty and the Every Year is a Victory is examples of those two. And Eleanor in Finland designed the text card in the middle, that today is the day you can do something amazing, etc., etc. And we, that's my colleague Hannah McDowell and I, wanted to go a bit further than that. And what we thought was, if you're going to raise the whole issue of ageism, what better place than to start with looking at birthdays? And we didn't want to basically send people a lecture on their birthday, or, you know, politically correct, you should do this, you should be thinking that. But we thought it'd be a playful way of raising the issue, because people are often very conflicted about their birthday, but how we might actually raise a positive way of celebrating another year of life. We also think, obviously, as both Sarah and Linda have said, we're fearful of aging and birthdays from a very, very early age, and ageism is often only focused upon 50 plus, so it's only a kind of issue for older people, as it were. But actually, we wanted to highlight this as being something across the whole age range. So all of these cards that you can see on this slide are actually now on sale. Serendipitously, we all kind of put on, focused on this kind of campaign in the last year. Now, and particularly delighted that Age Proud Leeds is also a member of this group. And in fact, Age Europe, I know Estelle's with us today, are currently looking with the folks in Colorado, with Eleanor in Finland, as to kind of a campaign looking at launching anti-ageist birthday cards, and perhaps going beyond simply celebrating a particular year, as it were, but actually using them as tools, whether they be tools such as a workshop like today, or whether they be exhibitions or whatever, but highlighting the whole thing about ageism through birthday cards. We're looking to develop a kind of international collaborative that would be like an e-shop, so there will be one place that you can buy all the different cards. And also, I think, taking the point Matt raised earlier, whether we can do something about in the editor, you know, there's a push to look at changing editors' protocols in ageist language, is looking at whether there's also something that would start focusing upon imagery, including birthday cards. In America, the Greeting Cards Association is being addressed by changing the narrative, the folks in Colorado this year in May, in a couple of weeks' time. And we're looking to do the same later this year in the greeting cards industry. I think it's November, their big conference is as well. So we're really delighted and keen to do this collaboratively, and we're really interested if you want to get involved, want to know more about it, get in touch with Linda at Age Proud Leeds, or in fact myself. So that's kind of it, I guess.
Thank you. So we're going to actually share contact details at the end of the session as well, so you should be able to see those contact details if you want to reach out to us. And I think Dave created a blog for us at Time to Shine, and I think Estelle's just shared one that was shared with them as well. So you're quite a proficient blog writer, right, Dave? Quite, you know, some great stuff out there. Okay, thank you very much for that. I think I love that Daily Grind card. I might seek that out and send it to that friend I've just mentioned. Do a good to read it. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to pass to Sarah now, who's going to talk to us about challenging ageism.
Thanks, Linda. So within our Age Proud Leeds campaign, our first key message is let's talk about ageism, and we saw this as something really important, that, you know, we wanted to start those conversations, to start people reflecting and thinking about it, and to learn more. And the hope was that through this sort of raising awareness, through doing activities like the birthday card one we've just done, it's hoped that people will be able to recognise ageism and start to call it out. But we do recognise also that this isn't always easy. As ageism is, it's not a new thing. It's been around, I think the term was coined back in 1969, so 52 years ago, by Robert Butler. But it does sort of go under the radar, as we've all mentioned, for one reason or another. It is socially normalised, it's accepted. We all have these age-related biases and judgments within us through living and growing in this society that accepts it. And as we've said, we mainly think of ageism as a bias against older people, but it does affect people of all ages. And as shown in the recent report by the World Health Organization, which was launched last month, the impacts of ageism are wide-reaching and significant, affecting many areas of our life, such as our physical and mental health, our life expectancy, our employment prospects, how much we participate in society, how the media represents us, access to services, the list goes on. So we see and hear ageism everywhere. Comments are often meant humorously and without malice. And as we've said, people laugh about it, we move on. As you know, there isn't a sort of an intention to discriminate there. But quite often, as with other forms of discrimination, when we hear something ageist, it makes us feel uncomfortable, even though sometimes it's hard to pinpoint why that is. And with other forms of discrimination, it is just as important with ageism to try to challenge it when we see it, when we feel it, when we hear it, even when we do it. It's about challenging ourselves as well. So we're going to go back into our breakout rooms and have a discussion about challenging ageism and ways to do it. These are the questions which we're going to be thinking about. Have you ever experienced ageism? Do you think you might have been ageist yourself? How do you feel about challenging ageism amongst your family and friends and also within the workplace? What barriers are there to challenging it? And what do you think is the best approach to challenging it? So we're going to go back into the same breakout rooms, I think, and then come back and feedback on those discussions.
Okay, I think we've got everybody back. So welcome back into the main room. Hope those conversations went nice and smoothly. I'm going to, similarly to earlier on, just going to ask the people, the facilitators in the rooms, to feedback. So again, we'll stick in with a numerical order. We'll start with you, Sarah, if you want to just feedback on how the conversation in your room went and the answer to the questions.
Okay, we didn't get through all the questions, but we did have a really interesting discussion. The first thing around, have you ever experienced ageism? We had a couple of examples of people who felt that they'd experienced it based on recruitment. So people who had, very well established careers as CEOs and had struggled in terms of finding new employment, and that they felt that age was a factor, looking at people who had been recruited into positions that they'd gone for were all younger. And also we had a discussion around application forms, and whilst they don't directly ask for age, it is sort of implicit in things like when you have to put your school in your qualifications, it's clear as to how old you actually are to somebody who's looking at that form. We talked a little bit about whether we thought we'd been ageist, and that conversation was around that internalising of ageism. So a couple of people talked about how they thought they'd been ageist towards themselves, and then that got onto a conversation which looked at sexism and ageism and that interplay, particularly around menopause and within employment as well, and how that is not really ever really considered in terms of the impact that menopause has on older women in employment, and given consideration to that. And then finally, we briefly talked about ways of challenging ageism, and one suggestion was around organisationally, the way that people are categorised as age, so services for over 65, services for certain age groups, and how that just segregates us and doesn't allow for that intergenerational connection, and that being an issue that's perpetuating it as we go on. And finally, about people perhaps would feel more confident challenging ageism within their family, but would maybe find it a little bit more difficult with a stranger or perhaps in a workplace setting. So if anyone's got anything further to add from my group or anything I've missed, please do shout out.
No, looks like you've covered everything there, Sarah. Thanks very much. Okay, Dave, do you want to feedback on your room?
Yeah, I'm always in awe of Sarah's note-taking, so I'm going to go into a bit of a free fall here because of the conversation we had. I think the first thing, we had a really interesting focus upon age ourselves, in the sense of the assumption that we're talking about older people. And what we started looking at was examples of stereotypical approaches to younger people and their experiences. And in fact, it did emerge that although you might not have thought of it as being ageist attitudes towards oneself, there were a couple of instances where clearly people felt that somebody wasn't experienced enough to fully participate or do actions, etc., etc. But you might not have thought of it as being, you know, experiencing ageism. We use different languages, or you kind of, I assume if you're younger, you expect to be put down by older people, kind of thing. That's part of growing up, you know, kind of stuff. So that was quite an interesting aspect. There was some admission of the kind of banter in the office about, you know, slightly older colleagues playing to the more youthful members of the office. And although it was well-intentioned, etc., actually, you know, it plays into that whole kind of older, younger, you know, role playing, as it were, which can so easily become quite repressive. My experience of all that kind of training around comfort zones, you're put in your place if you're a younger person. In the same way, if the dominant age group is perhaps younger and you're an older member in a workplace, you can so easily be made to feel, you know, out of the loop in many ways. Slightly prompted, I guess, because I am totally interested in fashion and clothing, etc., etc. I think they're really good examples as we, the group, experienced in, you know, what feels appropriate to wear, whether yourself internalized ageism or, and I'm not going to go into too many details in sharing unless you want to, if in our group, about what is appropriate for you to wear by those close to you, partners, you know, close friends, etc., etc. Should you really be wearing that at your age? But breaking out of that, but actually challenging one's own ageism. And I'm going to refer to Jo because she may be fashioning, you know, her nose ring. But, you know, good on you. Actually challenging that feeling of, should I at my age be getting a nose ring, and stuff like that. Interesting thing about raising the issue of ageism within family, particularly, and recognizing that it exists, and a lot of issues around folks you know, concerned about aging, and not wanting to refer to their age, and also that kind of fearful notion about getting older. And so therefore there was a reference to perhaps being more gentle about raising these issues rather than radical. I'm just thinking that I think they were the kind of main things that sort of came up. I don't know, folks, please chip in. Any other perspectives, thoughts, comments?
I think you covered it pretty well. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dave. It sounds like you've got some really interesting conversations in those rooms.
Very much.
I feel like I've missed out, really. Okay, if I can pass to Vicky then, if you can tell us what the conversation in room 3 was like.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we could have gone on much longer. We were sort of pulled out of the conversation, which often happens, isn't it, when we're in breakout sessions. So we kind of started at the top. We started with the first question, and then it just kind of became a bit of an organic conversation, really. And have we experienced ageism? Yes, we probably have, but probably in more subtle ways rather than very sort of explicit ways, because it is very insidiously there. But then there was the kind of, well, actually ageism happens at both ends. It happens for older people, but it happens for younger people as well. And that's kind of thinking around, you know, are you experienced enough to be doing that job? And I gave an example of, you know, my own sort of ageist bias, I guess, around now when I go to the doctors seem very, very young, much younger than me, and you know, that kind of makes me think, oh, you know, but I think it more makes me think about my own age rather than their lack of knowledge or experience. So it's absolutely there. And then one of the members in our group works with students and kind of challenged them on using the word elderly, to change that and reframe that to older people. And it's like, well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with the term elderly? You know, we're trying to help people, so it's that idea that, you know, older people aren't necessarily vulnerable, that need saving and helping, and they might like to help you in ways that they can help you, as you can help them in ways that you can help them. So there's that interplay across that intergenerational sort of thing. And that, you know, older people don't like being called elderly. It's offensive, and youngsters perhaps don't understand us. So again, you know, that comes again, that sort of younger sort of ageist vibe. And there was this idea that wisdom comes in lots and shapes and forms, and everybody's got wisdom. It's just different types of wisdom. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's about the age that you are. And then someone else in the group shared how a parent was being pretty sort of ageist around their age, saying that they are more experienced in parenting because they're older than the person in the group who's 10 years younger. And that was quite offensive as well, because it's, you know, just because I'm younger than you doesn't mean that I'm not more experienced in parenting. So again, it's this idea that if you're older, you've got more experience and more to offer. And then there's this idea that, yeah, probably we are all very ageist, but without knowing it. And I think the way to challenge it is to be open, honest, and more aware of it, and then we can have those conversations. So it's not so much it won't happen, it's just be more mindful when it happens and how we can actually just change those conversations to understand that maybe we do need to change our language, and maybe we do need to be doing things in a different way. So yeah, I think that pretty much summed up what we were talking about. Please do add anything in from my group if I haven't mentioned your point. But I think that was pretty much it in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you very much. That's brilliant. It does sound like the conversations have been really rich. So yeah, and hopefully this will help us all to kind of think about ageism and challenge it in a bit more of a confident way now. But it is quite a tricky topic, isn't it? Okay, and oh, sorry, Sarah, did you have something to add?
Yes, I do actually. I've recently been looking into the effects of long-term discrimination on people's mental health and physical health. And it occurred to me, I became, which is very bad actually, and it's long-term and it's really negative. And when you look at the people in the mental health service that have experienced long-term discrimination through racism, homophobia, etc., it also occurred to me that actually the same thing's happening to older people. As you age, I became deaf at 40 and following an accident. So it wasn't a natural process, it was sudden, and I found it very difficult. But in my struggle to try to hear and get used to lip reading suddenly, and wearing big hearing aids, I've since had operations and have some hearing restored. And it's wonderful that these give me as good access as you, because they're set up to Zoom meetings. It's better than real life meetings. But when people lose their hearing, we discussed eyesight earlier, and that's associated with age, but so is hearing. But hearing is far more profound. And as you lose your hearing, you lose your concept of what's going on around you. When you get if you getting very subtle negative impact from that, you're not taking part in conversations, people perhaps aren't including you, you are withdrawing, it's a cumulative effect. I know it happened to me very seriously, and I had to fight to get out of it. You withdraw, and that impacts not only how you look, it affects how you dress, how you age, how you are. So I don't know if this, I've seen lots of work being done to get people to help people alleviate isolation, but actually I think there needs to be more work around self-worth as you age, being aware that actually if you address losing your hearing or your eyesight head on, and you're loud and proud about it, and looking around the room, there's some wonderful glasses. You can't see my hearing aids, but I have long hair to cover them, sadly, because people's perception of someone who needs hearing aids is not positive. But if there was something to empower people to age with more confidence, and if you can have mirrors held up to you so that you look at your appearance and how you're perceived, I think the aging process would be a lot easier for many people.
Sarah, hi. I work for RNID, and yeah, and I've for the last 3 years I was on a project based in Greater Manchester, which was all around hearing loss as you age and isolation and the impacts it has. And part of our project was to try and get people who are experiencing isolation due to the hearing loss and the lack of confidence back out to doing things they used to do. So we used to try and get people, and we were working alongside Ambition for Aging on this project, and it was really interesting because the project again was for over 50s, but actually there were lots of people who were younger who were experiencing the start of hearing loss and problems like that were also going through the same issue. And it was very difficult to kind of say to people, no, we can't help you because you're not over 50. We didn't do that. We would help whoever came to us for help. But it is a major issue, and we've just started a project in January in Leeds, actually trying to do a similar thing, which has been a bit of a slower start due to obviously people aren't meeting in the groups and things like that, but we are getting there, and we're trying to kind of get a bit of a foot in the door to find people who we can help with that process. And it's a lot more isolating, confidence shattering than people even realize, because people say, oh, it's just hearing loss, or you're not in pain, or you can still go out and do this, or you can. We've even had people say, oh, well, at least they're not blind, and at least they're not this, and at least, and they don't realize the negative impact that even losing your hearing in one ear, even starting to lose it, just missing out on, like you say, those bits of conversations, it can be really, really demoralizing for people.
I've actually been helping unofficially. I don't do it professionally, but I also have, from the accident, tinnitus, and they often go side by side. And it's mine is absolutely dreadful, I have to admit, but I've learned to cope with it. And you don't learn to cope with it on your own, and there's not enough that's done for all of that. And learning to use hearing aids, gosh, it takes 4 years for the brain. I don't know if anyone knows this, but 4 years for the brain just to adjust to a new level of hearing loss. So it's a cumulative effect that lasts for a
Yeah.
long time. But if you know that and you can see the end result, you can get through it far quicker.
People aren't often told that though, even when they first get a hearing aid, they're just kind of told to get on with it. And then they really don't like them and it's really difficult. And you have to train yourself, you have to train your brain to get used to it. But tinnitus is a massive, massive issue amongst, I'd say about 75%, if not 80% of people that we speak to are actually suffering or struggling more with the tinnitus than the hearing loss.
Thank you. And I think I mean that sounds like the conversation about ageism and challenging it has been really helpful and really interesting. And I think we could probably talk about this forever, really, and all the different aspects of it. But we kind of need to wrap up because I think we were due to end at 11:15 and we're already overrunning. So I can finish the workshop because we do have just one kind of thing to end with, but completely understand if people want to disappear and go because you've got other things to do. But if you do have to leave early, then it's sort of thank you in advance for joining us today. It has been a really good session. But I think when we planned the Age Proud campaign and we involved the Age Friendly Steering Group in designing those 5 key messages, we began first of all by making sure that we got people talking about this topic because people weren't really talking about age discrimination and the impact that it has on us. And we tried to cover things like making sure that we were letting people know that it's not just about getting older. Ageism affects people of all ages. It's affecting younger people just as much as younger ones. And we also worked hard at making sure that we said how ageism starts to impact on different people as they age. So people that are coming from different ethnic backgrounds and those with disabilities that have had lifelong disabilities and how that intersects with age as we're getting older. And we did actually create a podcast, which is called the Voices podcast. And I think, Sarah, I can't share it, unfortunately, but if you can possibly share that in the chat, the link to the podcast. And that kind of looks at how different people who've experienced barriers throughout their lives really are then starting to see age impacting on that as well. So that's really good. But we've also, the 5th key message, we wanted to end on a bit of a positive. So the 5th key message is actually called Time to Feel Good About Aging. So Sarah, if you can reshare the slide. Sorry, I'm asking you to do multitask now. But the Time to Feel Good About Aging is a specific activity that's on the Age Proud website, so any of you can do this at any time really. But what we're asking people to do is just tell us one good thing about getting older. So we're inviting you all to do that now as part of this workshop, and you can either raise your hand and tell us, or you can type it into the chat here so that we can see. But you know that it obviously aging does bring its challenges, just like every other stage of life brings challenges. But you know, just tell us one good thing, one great thing about getting older. Who'd like to start?
I can start if you want.
Yeah, please.
Working with older people regularly, the main thing I'm looking forward is to have all the big life decision behind me, you know, like at the moment they are ahead of me, and it can be quite pressuring to say the least.
Thanks, Estelle. Andy, did you have something?
Yeah, well, yeah, similar to that really. It's responsibilities are are kind of behind you. You've done your caring, except of course with your aging parents, which is you know, you're in that sort of sandwich position. But yeah, I've just bought a camper van this week, so I'm looking forward to loads of great leisure time, enjoying myself, me and my partner out there, seeing the world again in a different light with less responsibility and hopefully soon less work to do too.
Brilliant, thanks, Andy. I envy you. I'm longing for a camper van. Anybody else? We've got some great ones in the chat. So people are saying that they just feel more confident and able to be themselves, and that they're feeling wiser. don't apologise at all about taking over. That was really interesting addition to the workshop, so no need to apologise at all. Dave?
Yeah, I just want to throw in, I'm going to put aside the whole thing about being wiser. I like the opportunity to learn and grow, and actually, if anything, acknowledge that I know very little, and there's a lot to experience still.
Yeah, thank you. I think a lot of people are saying things like being more emotionally intelligent, more confident, more philosophical, calmer. These are great things to start feeling, aren't they, as we're getting older, and things that are challenges for us sometimes in the younger stages. And yeah, absolutely, Vicky, there's still so much more to experience. Thank you very much. So I think we'll end there because we have overrun by a few minutes, but thank you ever so much, everybody, for joining in. And if you want to go to the Time to Shine website, the opportunity to look at the, I forgot what I was going to say now, to add to your one good thing about getting older, and also to listen to the podcast. And I think Sarah was going to share a slide that was about tips to challenging ageism, and she's put a link to that in the chat there, so that because we overran, we kind of didn't go to that. But there are top 10 tips for challenging ageism, especially if you see that in the media, and the opportunity to stand up and say that's not okay. Okay, thank you ever so much, everybody, for being here. It's been really interesting. Sorry for the technical issues at the beginning, but I hope it hasn't spoiled the experience. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.